Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayeishev, begins on page 199 in the Artscroll Stone Chumash. Parshas Vayeishev, that is Bereshis 37, chapter 37, verse 1. Once again, page 199. It begins, Yaakov settled in the land of his father, sojourning in the land of Canaan. And these are the chronicles of Yaakov. Yosef, at the age of 17, was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock. But he was a youth with the sons of Bilhan, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Yosef would bring evil reports about them to their father. And this is the beginning of Yosef with, I don't think I need to give a spoiler alert, that his brothers end up hating him and they sell him as a slave down to Egypt. Yes, Ellen? Oh, good. Happy to hear. Okay. It's a traditional Hanukkah drink, or we can make it one. So, so the commentaries comment on how the Parsha starts. It's called Parshas Vayeishev. That means, and he settled. And the Medrash says that Yaakov wanted to live comfortably, and he felt that he wanted, after everything he'd been through, he had a rough life. And he spent 20 years away from his father in the house of Lavan, the house of a con man, and worked hard there. And then he had this incident with his daughter Dinah, and he was ready to settle down, relax. He wanted to live with shalva, with tranquility. And then and that's why this whole incident happened. And that's why Vayeishev, he settled. He wanted to settle and live comfortably. And when it talks about his fathers, in fact, it doesn't use the word that they settled somewhere. It says vayagar, that they sojourned, which is that's a term of temporary living. Like if you sojourn somewhere, it means that you're staying there temporarily, not that that's your place of living. And if you look back, how quickly I can find it, when it's probably actually the beginning of it. I don't know how quickly I'll be able to find it. Let's see. And we're almost there. That was after the incident with Dina, I think.
Oh, wait, Bobby. A second.
Okay. Sorry. I think I'll actually go back a little further. That if you go back all the way to Parshas, let's try Toldo. Here, give me 1 second to pause. Yep. Okay, so we're working on it. We'll get there. Sorry. Okay, I'll just so when it comes to Yitzchak, I'm not finding it as quick as I'd like to, but when it comes to Yitzchak, Hashem tells Yitzchak, Gur ba'aretz hazayis, that you should dwell in this land. That
there's also a pasuk, Vayeishev Yitzchak Begrar.
Begrar, that's an interesting question. I'm not ready to answer that, but I found it. Okay, so it's on page 129. So this is in page 129, chapter 26, verse 3. That there it says, Hashem, backing up to 2, Hashem appeared to him and said, do not descend to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I indicate to you. Again, his commandment was not to, dwell in the land that I shall indicate to you. Sojourn in this land, and I'll be with you and bless you. It was almost commanded to sojourn there as opposed to settle there. So, okay, that's what I was looking for. So the commentaries say there again that that's how our forefathers were supposed to live, not as in a settled life that this is where I live, but to sojourn. And what's the reason for this? So I saw the Klayakar says, and I saw this actually in one of the commentaries in the Medrash Rabbah that I was actually seeing from our studies in the Kollel. This was actually relevant to halachic discussion we were having. One of the commentaries in the Medrash Rabbah does the same thing as the Klayakar, that Avraham was told that his descendants would be strangers in a strange land for 400 years. But in fact, we know that we were slaves in Egypt for 210 years. So how is that prophecy? How is that prophecy upheld? So our sages say that it really began from the birth of Yitzchak, because with the birth of Yitzchak, Avram already had descendants that would carry on his legacy, and that was Yitzchak. And from that point, his descendants were strangers in a strange land because they never settled anywhere. That they moved around and they were kind of living at the mercy they weren't proper citizens of the land, and they were living in the territory and with permission from the ones who controlled the land. So in a sense, they were strangers in a strange land, and they did have some level of oppression. But if Yaakov wanted to settle in the land and live in peace, live in tranquility, so then that time wouldn't count as being a stranger in a strange land. So immediately, once he was looking for that, so Hashem started the process of sending us down to Egypt, and that was Yosef being the one to lead the way. And eventually he brought us there as well. Okay, so now it continues. And once again, in verse 2, these are the chronicles of Yaakov, Yosef. The article translates the chronicles literally. It means these are the descendants of Yaakov, Yosef. And the Ramban says, and this is actually a quote from the Medrash Rabbah, that Yosef resembled Yaakov more than any of the other brothers. And Yaakov felt that. He recognized that their destinies were similar, and that caused a stronger bond of love between them. And he says that both he and Yosef were hated by their brothers, and the brothers tried to kill them. And let's find it here. Oh, I have it here. Okay. And both their mothers were barren, and they both became wealthy, and they were also both born, and their sons were born outside the land of Israel. That Yaakov's sons were born except for Binyamin, Yaakov's sons were born in Aram, and Yosef's sons were born in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. And they both had prophecies from dreams, and they both went down and died in Egypt, and they're both buried in the land of Israel. That their lives mirrored each other's in many ways. And that's what it's saying. These are the sons of Yaakov, Yosef, because Yosef was the most son of any of his sons. He took after his father. So it says Yosef at the age of 17 was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, but he was a youth with the sons of Bilhan, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Yosef would bring evil reports about them to their father. So when they would do something that Yosef felt was wrong, he would let his father know about this. And so you just say he had good intentions. His intentions were that to try to set them on the right path. But he was not necessarily judging them favorably, where he could have found an answer why what they're doing wasn't so bad, but he was kind of looking for something to pass on. And also he should have spoken to them first before going to the father. You see, that's the first step. If we see something on headed down a bad path, instead of trying to find someone else to intervene, talk to them and see if we could make a difference. So it continues in verse 3. Now Israel loved Yosef more than his son, since he was a child of his old age. Ramban says that the custom was that that one of the sons would be the one who would assist their parents when they were elderly, and would be like the one they would lean on and take care of them. And that was what Yosef did for his father. And he made him a fine woolen tunic. Many translate this, a coat of many colors. On page 201, his brothers saw that it was he whom their father loved most of his brothers, so they hated him. They could not speak to him peaceably. Our sages say this is something that's not great about the brothers, but it also says something about their greatness, is that when they hated him, that they were so honest that they couldn't pretend, that they couldn't be those who, would have hate in their heart and act as if they're best friends. That when they didn't like him, they couldn't bring themselves to flatter him and show love. So in verse 5, Yosef dreamt a dream which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear, if you please, this dream which I have dreamt. Behold, we are binding sheaves in the middle of the field," meaning binding bundles of grain. And behold, my sheaf arose and remained standing. Then behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Sounds like something that wouldn't exactly make his brothers love him, but the commentaries say that Yosef, maybe with some level of naivety, he thought that this would help, because he was saying that why are they jealous of me? They're jealous of me because I seem to be lording over them, and I'm the one. My father shows more love to me, and maybe I try to give reports, try to work on improving improving them. And so he wanted to tell them this dream to say, look, this is a prophecy. And this is a message from God that I am supposed to be the one that you bow down to. And in his mind, they would accept that as this is a prophecy. We have to follow that. And this is the way things are supposed to be. But they felt that rather than a prophecy, this is what he's thinking about. Because Rabbi Slater spoke about this between Mincha and Meir a few days ago, about how dreams there could be an elements of prophecy in dreams, but especially nowadays, usually a dream is whatever we were thinking about during the day or a short time before we go to sleep. And people have nightmares, and especially people are very suggestible. So if you tell somebody, don't dream about this, of course, that's going to be the first thing they dream about. But so the brothers thought he's dreaming about our bundles bowing down to his bundle because during the day, he's thinking about us bowing down to him. Yeah.
I guess he talked about.
Oh yeah, about dreams and the meanings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I heard behind the pharmacy counter. An expired isn't.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Well, okay, that's there could be worse dreams than that. I'm sure that's traumatizing at the time. Yeah. Okay. Okay, continuing on, and in verse 8, his brothers said to him, would you then reign over us? Would you then dominate us? And they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his talk. And he dreamt another dream and related it to his brother. And he said, his brothers, look, I dreamt another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Again, and the Beis Levi says they view this even worse because the sun, the moon, the stars represent the spiritual world, whereas the sheaves of grain represent wealth, represent food, wealth. So he's saying the first dream was a matter of, he was saying he would dominate them with wealth and with earthly ways, whereas with the stars bowing down to him, that was representing they would be subjugated to him spiritually, and that was that really got them angry. And there it says his father scolded him and said to them, what is this dream that you have dreamt? Are we to come, I, your mother, and your brothers, to bow down to you to the ground? So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So the Beis Levi points out that where the first dream it says the brothers hated him, this one it says they're jealous of him because they understood this to mean in spiritual matters. And that's something that's worthy of jealousy, whereas by money, it's just a matter of you feel like you could be in charge of us. But there's nothing to be jealous about because money isn't intrinsic to a person's worth. It's what a person has. So there's I think it's the Beis Levi brings a mashal that an expression people used to say that if you have more money than me, so my wallet should be jealous of your wallet, but there's no reason for me to be jealous of you, because that doesn't mean that you're any different than me. It means your wallet's different than mine. Your bank account's bigger than mine. You're not bigger than me. But in spiritual matters, he's trying to say I'm bigger than you. I'm spiritually more important. Okay, and the father said that I, your mother, and your brothers to bow down to you, that he understood the dream to be saying that the sun represented Yaakov, the father, and the moon represented his mother, Rachel. And so he said that there's an element of untruth in the dream anyway, because your mother had already died. No, she died in childbirth with Binyamin, yes. So Rashi says that in truth, the moon represented Bilhah, who was his mother's maidservant before, and the Ramban actually disagrees, says Bilhah had died by the time they went to Egypt, but it represented everyone else in the household, that there was Yaakov, the sons, and everyone else in the household were represented by the moon. Okay, so now Yosef is sent to find his brothers and find out what's going on with them. They were shepherding the sheep. Yosef was sent out. So on page 203, And he arrived in Shechem, and in verse 15, a man discovered him, and behold, he was blundering in the field. He was looking for them and couldn't find his brothers. The man asked him, saying, "What do you seek?" And he said, "My brothers do I seek. Tell me, please, where they're pasturing." The man says, "They have journeyed on from here, for I heard them saying, 'Let us go to Dosan.'" So Yosef went after his brothers and found them at Dosan. And here the Medrash says that this man that he found was actually the angel Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, which is the angel the messenger that carries out Hashem's justice in the world. So, so the commentators say, what's the deep meaning of this? He asked someone for directions. Why is there important that it's the angel Gabriel? And what's this incident telling us in the Torah? It doesn't tell us every step of the way. Why does it have to tell us that he asked for directions? So our sages are teaching us that he was looking for his brothers. What would happen if he couldn't find them? He would have gone back to Yaakov, said, "I looked for them, I couldn't find them. I'm so sorry. Maybe we'll send out a search party." And this whole incident wouldn't have happened. So it's teaching us that when something's destined to happen, when Hashem arranges something to happen, there's no escaping it. You could miss it. You could try to miss a connection. There could be you could be close to missing a connection, and this could have happened, and that could have happened. We say if only if God forbid there's a car accident, a person could say if only they would have if only they would have left 5 minutes later, they wouldn't even have met that. But that's what this is teaching us, that if something's supposed to happen, if Hashem arranges something to happen, so Gabriel, the angel, will be sent to make sure it happens. They could have missed the connection, but he didn't miss the connection because the connection had to happen. Okay, so he went after his brothers, found them at Dosan. In verse 18, they saw him from afar, and when he had not yet approached them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, "Look, that dreamer is coming. So now come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'A wild beast devoured him.' Then we shall see what will become of his dreams." So Reuben heard, and he rescued him from their hands. He said, rather than kill him directly, he said, "We will not strike him mortally." And in page 205, and Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into a pit in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him," intending to rescue him from the hand to return him to his father. So Reuben's intention was throw him in a pit and let him die on his own instead of killing him by hand. And and his plan was to come back and rescue him. So our sages say that the brothers weren't really wrong. That it wasn't that these brothers were jealous and they conspired and says, "Let's commit murder." They felt that they were right, and they actually convened a din Torah, they convened a court, and made this decision as part of a court that he's deserving of death, because they felt that that with Yosef telling on them to their father, letting their father know all the wrongs that he perceived that they did. So and with his dreams and domination, he was thinking that Avram had 2 sons and more, but originally 2 sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael, and one of them was chosen to carry on the legacy, the mission of the Jewish people, and one of them was not, and that was Yitzchak, who was chosen. And then Yitzchak had 2 sons, Yaakov and Esav, and one of them, Yaakov, was chosen to carry on his legacy, and one was not. So they looked at Yosef and said, Yosef must be looking back and thinking, well, there are 12 of us, and so I must be the one who's chosen to carry on this mission, and the rest of you could go do your own thing. To them, to be excluded from this mission of being the Jewish people in the world, that's equivalent to killing them. That he's trying to destroy them spiritually, and they felt he was deserving of death for that. And okay, so they cast him in a pit, and it says the pit was empty, there was no water in it, or so just say that there was no water, but there were snakes and scorpions. It was still a dangerous place to be. And they sat to eat food. They raised their eyes and saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming to Gilead, their camels bearing spices, balsam, and lotus. So then Yehuda, in verse 26, Yehuda said to his brothers, "What gain will there be if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let our hand not be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." So what does that mean, what gain will be for us? Are they looking for, Rashi says, what money are we making? Rather than just let him die, let's sell him as a slave, which is equivalent to a death sentence. A slave is they're dead. There's no future for him. Slavery wasn't wasn't a career that had too many opportunities for advancement in Egypt, and there was no escape there. They were saying, let's sell him as a slave, and that'll take care of the problem, and we'll make some money. The Beis Levi, though, has a different approach to this. The Beis Levi understands that they're saying, why would we punish somebody? And in general, why do we punish people for crimes? And just in the side, so this is the Beis Levi, the Sforno says almost the exact same thing. But the Beis Levi says, why do we punish people for crimes? So there are two basic reasons. It's either as revenge, that they did something wrong, we want them to suffer for the wrong they did, or it's as a to prevent other people from doing it. And just if word gets out that somebody who does this is punished, so people might think twice before doing it. So what he was saying, what gain will we have if we kill him? So what did they say? If we kill our brother, meaning he's our brother. So we when it comes to a brother, one shouldn't want to take revenge on them. That we should forgive him as far as any desire for revenge. So what other gain is there? What's the point? Why are we doing this? As a just to people know that this is something that's not tolerated, and no other people will try to do this. But they said, but if we cover it up, that's why they said, what gain will there be if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? If we cover it up and nobody knows about it, we make sure nobody knows about it. So then nobody knows about it, doesn't prevent any other people from acting in that way. So I was saying there's no point. There's no reason to do this because neither of those philosophies apply. So I said, well, sell him as a slave, and that'll keep him away from, that'll keep him out of trouble and stop him from bothering us, but we don't have to kill him. Okay, so they sold him to Egypt. Skip a little bit. So in verse 29, so now Reuven returned to the pit. Remember, he had suggested they throw him into the pit, and he had left and didn't hear this whole thing. So he came back to rescue him from the pit, and behold, Yosef was not in the pit. So he rent his garments. Returning to his brothers, he said, the boy is gone, and where can I go? They took Yosef's tunic, slaughtered it, a goatling, and dipped the tunic in the blood. They dispatched the fine wool and tunic and brought it to their father and said, we found this, identify it if you please, is it your son's tunic or not? So they dipped it in animal blood and asked him to identify it. He recognized it and said, my son's tunic, a savage beast devoured him. Yosef has surely been torn to bits, and Yaakov rent his garments and placed sackcloth on his loins. He mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose to comfort him, but he refused to comfort himself. And he said, for I will go down to the grave mourning for my son, and his father bewailed him. And the commentaries here say that his father bewailed him means Yaakov's father bewailed him, meaning that Yitzchak was still alive at this point, and Yitzchak mourned for his son that he had to go through this trouble. And the comment Rashi says that Yitzchak knew that Yosef was alive, that he had a spiritual understanding, and he knew that Yosef was still alive, but he felt that if Hashem didn't reveal this to Yaakov, it wasn't his place to. So he mourned for his son, for Yaakov, but he did not mourn for his grandson, for Yosef, because he knew he was alive. Okay, and Midianites sold Yosef to Egypt, to Potiphar, according to Paro. There's a switch between the Midianites and the Ishmaelites a few times, and I'm not going to go into that today. We have to move. We just have a few more minutes. Okay. So next is the incident of Yehuda and Tamar. So on page 209, it was at that time that Yehuda went down from his brothers and turned away towards an Adulamite man whose name was Chira, and he married the daughter of a prominent merchant's name was Shua, and he conceived a son named Er, a son named Onan, and then a son named Shelah. And he took a wife for Er, his firstborn, who was Tamar. Er died, and then so since Er died without children, so the brother would have the mitzvah of Yibum, the levirate marriage, that if a man dies without children, so there's a mitzvah for one of his brothers to marry that wife. Whereas, and this is one of the few cases where there's an exception to prohibition in the Torah, where usually there's a prohibition against marrying the wife of a brother, even if that marriage is terminated, whether through divorce or death. But in this case, there's an exception if the brother died without children, so then there's a mitzvah on the brothers to marry her. Okay, so Onan married her into this levirate marriage and also didn't have children, and he died. Yes. So then it was time for Shelah, and Yehuda told Tamar, the wife, his son's wife, wait for him to grow up, and he was afraid that she was a little bit of a black widow. Already, two of his sons died married to her. He was afraid he might too. Okay, and many days passed. Tamar understood that he was keeping her away from him, keeping her away from Shelah, who she was supposed to marry. So in verse 14 on page 211, so she removed her widow's garb from upon her, covered herself with a veil, and in verse 15, when Yehuda saw her, he thought her to be a harlot since she had covered her face. And there's actually two approaches to what that means. Either that the way was that the harlots covered their faces, so people who knew them might know them, wouldn't recognize them. Or there are those that say that it's the opposite, meaning he knew who Tamar was. So he thought she was a harlot because if he saw her, he would know her as Tamar. Since she covered her face, he didn't know who she was. So he detoured her by the road and said, "Come, if you please, let me consort with you," if he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. And our sages say that it was as if the angel pushed him there. And this was a case where his free will was taken away from him. Because this had to happen. And as we'll say, he gave her a pledge, and she conceived and bore a son, and that was the great-grandfather of David HaMelech, of King David, who is the source of the kings of Israel, and ultimately the Mashiach is a descendant of him. Here we'll get there. So this whole section begins on page 209. It was at that time. What does that mean? It was at that time. So the Medrash says, what was going on then? So Yaakov was mourning his son Yosef, who he thought was torn up by an animal. And what else is going on? We said Yitzchak was mourning his son, who was mourning. And Yosef was mourning that he was sold as a slave. And so what was Hashem doing? So Hashem was preparing the Mashiach. Hashem was preparing for our redemption. And I think in Reb Shimon Schwab, that he commented, I think, it could have been the Beis Levi, but I saw it commented that that what was going on here was that this was the beginning of our first exile of the Jewish people. That the first exile of the Jewish people was in Egypt. So what was going on as this exile was beginning at that time that Yaakov was in mourning and Yosef was in mourning, he was going down to Egypt, which would pave the way for the Jews to go down to Egypt and eventually be enslaved. Hashem was working on the final redemption at that moment. That whenever Hashem puts us in a situation, Hashem always opens an exit, and the exit is there. Exit is prepared when we're first, even before we enter the trouble. And Hashem never puts us in a situation where we don't have an exit. And that, as we were going down into our first exile, Hashem was preparing the final exile, the final redemption. Okay, so okay. What is the positive one there? And they said this. So let's see. So on page 213, verse 24, it was about 3 months had passed that Yehuda was told, your daughter-in-law has committed harlotry, and moreover, she is conceived by harlotry. Yehuda said, take her out and let her be burned. So he felt she was deserving of death for breaking this bond of Yibum, of the connection between the brother what's the word? The levirate. So when someone is obligated in levirate marriage, that creates a bond that's similar to betrothal. So now it wouldn't carry a death penalty as adultery once the Torah was given, but at this point it would be similar to adultery. That it was as if she was betrothed to the brother. So as she was taken out, she sent word to her father-in-law saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, identify, if you please, whose are the seal, this wrap, and the staff that he gave to her as a security for her payment. Yehuda recognized and he said, she is right, it is from me, and as much as I did not give her to Shelah my son, and she was not intimate with her, and he was not intimate with her anymore, but he said, she's right, I'm wrong. And our sages say this is a case that Yehuda demonstrated why the kings come from Yehuda and perhaps earned that, is that he took responsibility. He could have kept quiet and nobody would have known any better. But he spoke up, took responsibility, even though it caused him a tremendous amount of shame, because it was the right thing to do. As the buck stops here, I need to take responsibility for my actions and what I did. And and in verse 27, it came to pass that at the time she gave birth, and behold, there were twins in her womb. And it happened as she gave birth, one put out his hand. The midwife took a crimson thread and tied it on his hand, saying, this one emerged first. And it was as he drew back his hand, and behold, his brother emerged. And she said, with what strength you asserted yourself? And she called his name Peretz, which means like a breach. And that he like caused a breach to open to pass through. Our sages say that they knew that he would be the ancestor of kings because there's a saying that Melech Peretz Geder, that a king breaks down the fence, meaning that everyone else, they need to go, if they come and there's a wall blocking them, so they need to go around to get to the gate to get through. Whereas the king, if he's traveling and there's a wall in the way, the king just has his servants just make a door. They could just have them breach the wall to get through. And since he made this breach, he was to be the king, that's Peretz. And he was the great-grandfather of David HaMelech, of King David. Afterwards, his brother, on whose hand was a crimson thread, came out and called his name Zerah. Okay, so now we're back. That was Yehuda, and now we're back to Yosef. And I find it very interesting that this Parsha is really about those two people. It's about Yehuda and Yosef. And they were both the kings of the Jewish people. This Parsha is all about the kings of the Jews. That Yosef was obviously the king in Egypt, but also when the firstborn rights was given to Yosef, and when the Klei Yakar says that that's why the coat of many colors that we mentioned at the beginning of the Parsha was the equivalent of the clothing of the Kohen Gadol that the high Kohen used to serve Hashem in, because Yosef was given the firstborn rights. But so when the kingdom split and the north seceded from the south in Israel and became the kingdom of Judah and the 10 tribes of Israel. So the kingdom of Judah was ruled by the kings from Yehuda, and the 10 tribes, the north, was mostly dominated by Yosef, and specifically Ephraim, the son of Yosef. So those were really the two kings. The two families of kings were from Yehuda and from Yosef. And at the end of days, our sages tell us that Mashiach, when we think of Mashiach ben David, the Mashiach who comes from the house of David, there will be preceded by a Mashiach from the house of Yosef. And he has the power to overcome Esav, so that's the king who will bring about the primary defeat of Esav, would be from Yosef. So this is really the story of the two of them, that they're bound by this, that they're both destined to be the kings of the Jewish people. Okay, so now Esav was sold to a Potiphar, who was a courtier of Paro, and Yosef found favor in his eyes, did a good job, and he was eventually appointed to run the whole household. And the Potiphar's wife, Yosef, was beautiful, and as it says in verse 6 on page 215, he left all that he had in Yosef's custody, and with him present, he concerned himself with nothing except the bread he ate. He said, Yosef, you run everything. I have nothing else to worry about, and just lazed around. And now Yosef was handsome of form and handsome of appearance, and his master's wife cast her eyes upon Yosef and said, lie with me. He adamantly refused. And in verse 10 on page 215, and so it was just as she coaxed Yosef day after day, so he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, to be with her. Then there was an opportune day when he entered the house to do his work, no man of the household staff being there in the house. She caught him alone, and she caught hold of him by his garment on page 217, saying, lie with me, but he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and went outside. And then she saw that he fled, so she claimed that he tried to lie with me. He tried to seduce me or to rape me. And she said, I screamed, and when I screamed, he went outside. So she blamed it on him. So, and she told him this, and Yosef's master threw him in prison. And okay. So in verse 21 on page 217, Hashem was with Yosef. He endowed him with charisma, and he put his favor in the eyes of the prison warden. The prison warden placed all the inmates of the prison in Yosef's custody, and everything that was done in there he would accomplish. Again, he found favor in the eyes, and he ended up running the whole prison. The prison warden did not scrutinize anything that was in his charge, and as much as Hashem was with him, whatever he did, Hashem made successful. So now that there were two people who were imprisoned with him, the cupbearer of the king, like the head butler, the one who brought the king the wine, and the head baker of the king. And he got angry at them. Sages say that he found a fly in the wine, and he found a rock, a pebble in the bread. So they were thrown into prison. And the chamberlain of butchers appointed Yosef to be with them. I say the butcher actually means that he was the executioner. That's why he was appointing people in the prison. And he took care of them, and they each had a dream. It says on page 219. So they asked him to interpret the dreams, and in verse 9 on page 219, the chamberlain of the cupbearers recounted his dream to Yosef. He said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a grapevine in front of me. On the grapevine were 3 tendrils, and it was as though it was budded. Its blossoms bloomed, and its cluster ripened into grapes, and Paro's cup was in my hands, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Paro's cup, and I placed the cup in Paro's palm. And Yosef said to him, this is interpretations. The 3 tendrils are in 3 days. In another 3 days, Paro will lift up your head and will restore you to your post. You will place Paro's cup in his hands, as was the former practice when he was cupbearer. So this dream means he saw these 3 vines of grapes grow, and you squeeze the grapes into Paro's cup, meaning you're going to get your old position back of being the chief butler, cupbearer of Paro. And then, and he asked him, so now that I know you're getting out, please say a good word for me to Paro to get me out too. And on page 221, the chamberlain of the bakers saw that he had interpreted well, so he said to Yosef, I too, in my dream, behold, 3 wicker baskets were on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of Paro's food, baker's handiwork, and the birds were eating them from the basket above my head. And Yosef responded and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Paro will lift your head from you and hang you on a tree. Birds will eat your flesh from you. And it was on the 3rd day, Paro's birthday. So it was a very similar dream, but this he interpreted in a negative way. And here our sages say that what was it that he saw that it was negative is that the birds were eating from the basket on his head. Usually birds stay away from people. So he says, but when do birds not stay away from people is when they're not alive anymore, then they eat them. So he said that that's a sign that that he was gonna lose his life. So in verse 20, and it was on the 3rd day, Paro's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he counted the chamberlain of cupbearers and the chamberlain of bakers among his servants. He restored the chamberlain of cupbearers to his cupbearing, that on his birthday he freed him, and the chamberlain of and he placed the cup in Paro's palm. But the chamberlain of bakers he hung, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. So Joseph's interpretations came true exactly. Yet the chamberlain of the cupbearers did not remember Joseph, but he forgot him. So Yosef asked him to say a good word to Paro, but he forgot. Once he was free, he forgot about Yosef. Okay, and the maftir there's a special maftir this week. The maftir we say is for Hanukkah, and the haftorah also is the haftorah for Shabbos, Hanukkah. Let's see. Okay. Anyway, shkoyach. Everybody have a great Shabbos and a happy Hanukkah.